Okay. So the purpose of this session is to demystify all this money that we've been talking about. By the time we're done with this session, my commitment to you is that you should be able to explain what is happening, what you need to do in your role in meeting this moment, and learn how we can collectively organize. So the first part is I'm gonna actually spend probably more time than I really like up here talking through all of the different federal resources and how we're meeting this moment. And then we're gonna close out with really an organizing discussion. What else do you need to know? How else do you need to move to really think about this moment? This will hopefully help to build upon the rest of the day so that by the time we get to the afternoon, we can put together an action plan together. So I'm gonna attempt to explain also a little bit more about Communities First, how we are playing in this moment, because most of you all received an invite, maybe from a friend, someone. In this moment, we're really thinking about how we really start to organize both at the federal and regional level, as we've been talking about to date. So a little bit more about Communities First. One of the things that we are holding is when we talk about this once-in-a-generation opportunity, we want to ground it in the reality of how we got to this place and in this point of time. When we think about past investments, the last largest investment in this moment, in many ways, we actually ground ourselves back to the 1960s. And at that time, when we were building out our infrastructure, we divided communities based off of race and class. And so even as we did our arts walk yesterday, one of the things that was talked about was how the interstate took out and cut off Providence's downtown area, and that is the line that helps to define downtown Providence from the rest of the community. And across anywhere in New England, if you think about where the interstate system is, you also can see the dividing line, both socially, economically, and even environmentally in many ways. And so in this moment, as we are reimagining what it means to invest in place, there is an invitation to really think about how do we start to really center the values that really put communities first. So one of the guiding pieces for us for Communities First is our principles. And these principles are not anything that we came up with. It really comes from the wisdom of community, whether it was the solidarity economy, whether it was the environmental justice principles through the Jemez principles that help to ground the work. But ultimately in this moment, we see it as an opportunity to really think about how do we repair past harm from our infrastructure investments, recognizing that what happened over the last 3 years, and I will start to dissect each of the bills, but what happened was that because many of the bills that we are talking about in federal funding is going to be flowing to the regions, how it got passed was in a bipartisan nature, which meant that Congress gave all carrots, no sticks. So if you want to do good, you can accelerate the change that we've been talking about in terms of a more just and equitable future. However, if you want to continue to operate as you always have done, there's actually nothing stopping you. And so a bit of this mobilizing for action is having more of those discussions for what needs to happen. How do we really center the wisdom of community? And Christopher started to talk about this, but that has been the grounding as the department and other agencies have been talking about this work. How do we really start to build out the civic infrastructure? So a lot of what we've been talking about is on the community-based side, because we believe that if we start to figure out that back office, if we start to strengthen the community-based organizations, they may be able to bridge. Early on, one of the things that was really interesting when Helen launched Communities First, she was like, this is about just getting resources to community-based organizations. And I was like, that's great. Philanthropy has been funding plans for a very long time. But as someone who has worked at local government and also at federal, the reality is, even for my own self, I can remember giving resources to community-based organizations based off of a plan that was not actually tied to anyone else's master plan, could not tap in and unlock any of the other federal resources. So we had to quickly shift our change a theory of change to really say this is a moment to resource communities to engage in the public planning government process. Because when they are tapped into those flows of capital and resources, it actually unlocks a greater pipeline of projects that could be made available to them. When their community neighborhood plan is actually part of a master planning process or regional planning process or neighborhood planning process, it then unlocks a different flow of funding that could actually help to support that stack of the vision. So when we talk about kind of people as infrastructure, it's also really thinking about how do we resource community-based organizations to really meet that moment and self-determine what they want to see. And throughout this conversation, outside of us really being clear about there is a climate crisis and it's real, and that racial equity is real, racial inequality is real, we are issue agnostic. So whether it's food justice, land sovereignty, whether it's really about transportation or housing, we are issue agnostic because we know that communities do not live single issue lives. But we do believe that we have to have a holistic solution to the challenges, and that there are ways in which you are able to define that process as part of it. And how do we start to incentivize the proactive collaboration necessary to meet this moment, and that there has to be some level of accountability. And again, later on in this conversation, I want to talk to that accountability piece. I'll talk about it over the lunch, but yesterday's plenary with the state folks was a little tight, or let me say a little spicy, as Harriet Trigoni did an amazing job asking the questions to the public officials on the stage with how are they using this money and meeting this moment. The one thing that I will say is that this is a moment for accountability for the money that is flowing. Every state has an infrastructure czar. Do you know who your infrastructure czar is? So, this is that moment because they are the ones who are responsible for the water funding, the transportation funding, the broadband funding that is flowing to your state. And yet many of us don't even know, and they've been in these positions for at least 2 years. We're coming on the second anniversary of the infrastructure bill, but many of us don't even know who they are. In addition to that, many of the agencies or many of the governors have set up these interagency cabinets, but have you all had an opportunity to connect with any of those folks? This is that moment for us to really start to think about who needs to be part of our follow-up conversations when we leave here. So for us, when we talk about meeting this moment in terms of communities first, there are 3 major things that we've been focusing on. One is the alliance. So we have had to work with the network of networks and really thinking about who are the movement leaders, who has a power base, who has people who can show up to start to have this conversation so that we can strengthen the civic infrastructure. And for us, it's resourcing community-based groups to really meet this moment and smaller municipalities. Because the same challenges that we see playing themselves out on the community-based side are similar pieces if you're a small municipality as well. How do we start to really think about creating the enabling conditions for systems change? In this moment, it's about scale and impact. And so we are looking for the levers that we may be able to push to change what needs to happen as part of the conversation. And how do we influence the influencers and the decision-making process? So we spent the first year, honestly, trying to change those systems at the federal level, whether it was organizing or engaging the Thriving Communities Network, encouraging them to be created, starting to really organize with them around their principles that we'll talk a little bit more about, but also really thinking about what are the key programs that actually can help to benefit communities, and how do we double down on those rules of the road to actually ensure that communities can be centered. Those are a few pieces. We have both Communities First, which is a fund, but we also have the Alliance. We host monthly calls, and this is an opportunity for you to hear from the feds about what's happening, what are the new programs, what is flowing into space. We invite you all to be part of those conversations systems so that you can track what's happening. We recognize that everyone can't track the federal conversation, but if your organization is able to be kind of the intermediary or the person who can connect into what's happening and share with others, that is the only way that we are going to get this message out. It's a lot of things in this moment, and we really want to make sure that to the extent that those who want to understand what's happening, that they have the information. I also want to talk about the magnitude of this moment, and this is what inspires me to really wake up each day and spend 100% of my time really thinking about how we meet this moment. And I want to ground it into the 2009 foreclosure crisis, in addition to the recession that happened during that era. In that moment, when we were bailing out the banks, when we bailed out the auto industry, the number that was used to resource those industries was $800 billion with a B. We had never given that much money out, and it was literally a made-up number. It was like, how much would it take to address this issue? And Zab was like, $800 billion. And that was what we used to bail out the banks and the auto industry. And in this moment, we see this moment as an unimaginable number because during COVID, as we talked about with Mimi at the start of the day yesterday, the federal government put out $1.9 trillion to respond to COVID. 2 times the amount of money, over 2 times the amount of money that we used to bail out the banks in the auto industry. That's what was shared during COVID. And there was almost $400 billion made available to states and large municipalities to really tackle this crisis. That was the spring of 2001. By the fall, November 2021, there was an additional $1.2 trillion with a T, trillion dollars that was put out. So in total, we were already at 3.1 trillion. I need y'all to really understand this math. 4 times the amount of money that we used to bail out the banks in the auto industry was now in that moment being unlocked into states and municipalities. And so for me, I was holding my daughter and I was thinking, I don't think people understand what this means, because our communities are not going to look the same. I just want you to fully understand that there is a tsunami and the pipes haven't even fully opened up yet, but it is coming. And we are not really understanding, because we are talking about trillions, and I work in 6 figures. I don't even know how we get to a billion, nonetheless a trillion. So when they are putting out these numbers, I'm not quite sure that we understand the storm that is coming to us if we don't organize in this moment. Because the federal funding that's about to flow, or that is actively flowing, right? This is what we're going to be organizing against in the next 5 years. So either you are going to start to set the enabling conditions and get ready for what's coming and be part of it, or it is going to be what changes your community. That is what's coming in this moment, okay? So we are at 3.1 trillion with a T, right? And the feds have, by 2026, to spend it all, obligate it. We are in 2023. We have 3 years, and they're technically on a 24 cycle. So we've got 2 more years And all of this money has to be obligated. There has to be a plan for where this money goes. Do you understand? Okay, let's add some more money to this equation. So then, by the summer of last year, and just to give context for why these resources, to President Biden's credit, one of the things that he put out was really thinking through how do we have a plan for America that really deals with both our social infrastructure and our physical infrastructure. His plan did not get passed fully, but what was agreed upon was that the infrastructure components would be part of it, and then through the Inflation Reduction Act, the climate portion would be taking care of it. So that is what we hear when they talk about IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. But the way that they said that they would deal with the climate crisis was through a private sector strategy, and that is with the tax credits. So last summer, when that got passed, I was like, how can we play when it comes to tax credits when we don't even have the money to sit at the table? But let me give you one better, because this administration is committed to really thinking about how we meet this moment. They offered something called direct pay. It is about to change the game for what this means. In plain language, this is the first time that IRS is about to issue a check directly to nonprofit, 501, whatever you call yourself, entities throughout the structure line. So whether you're a municipality, a community-based organization, what they said was, we understand that purchasing the item and then catching it on the back end as a tax credit may not work for you. So what we are going to do is, if you put up the resource, if you put the plan, and you decide that you actually are going to invest in a climate investment, we will cut you the check. Let me make it plain language. I go to church. We need a van. We were already going to buy a church van. President Biden is saying, if you're going to buy that church van, don't buy a regular van, buy an EV van. And for 20%, we'll cut the check. So we'll give you 20% of the money up front for you to go get, instead of a regular van that you would purchase, you could get an EV van to really think about this. Or our church, we've been having a building fund for as long as I've been alive. We trying to figure out the rooftop. In this moment, President Biden says, guess what? If you put solar on that roof, I'll help you fix the roof and put solar on it so that we can reduce your energy burden. And depending on your neighborhood, we can stack it. These capital investments could add up to 70%. So that instead of the 100% of the cost that this would be, I may only need to come up with 30%. So all of the chicken dinners that we've been doing all of these years can finally meet this moment. We have never seen this moment where the IRS is going to give you a check in advance to ensure that you are actually building and being incentivized to invest in a clean energy future. This is that moment. And so when we talk about IRA, there has been a lot of energy that has said, hey, you need to prioritize these investments and not focus on the infrastructure ones. We need all of it. Between the 1.9 trillion, 1.2 trillion, 400 billion, and then they had something called the Science and Chips Act, and we don't invest around that because it's more focused on private industry, but I'll tell you how you find out who is. We now have $4 trillion. Remember, I started this story with an $800 billion Obama recovery piece, and we're talking about $4 trillion. And all of it is about to flow to your communities. So when we talked about yesterday that this is a bamboo moment, this is really about seeding the dreams for this generation. What are the investments that we want to see, and how do we start to organize and mobilize ourselves to really think about this? So I'm going to take a moment to start to unpack the different bills, and then I'm going to put it back together so that we can make it plain and what you should be thinking about at each step. So for the American Rescue Plan Act, the ARPA money, if you ask your state, they will say, we spent it all down. I just want you to know it's already been spent. But they have not given their receipts to Treasury. So in this moment, there is still 40% of unobligated funding. So they may have spent it down, but they have not issued this receipt to Treasury to say it has been spent. This is a moment to ask about, where are all of the dollars? This is also a moment to ask a question about, could some of the resources, because remember, it wasn't just states who got this money. There are towns that still haven't obligated all of their funding. So what does that look like? And what's powerful about what happened last year is that at the start of the year, Treasury said, you know what? If you still have money for COVID, you can use it to do whatever you'd like, as long as it sits within the space of infrastructure. It can be a match. It could be used as additional sources for you to enter into a competition, for you to enter into really thinking about how you invest in place. Now, they may have honestly spent it down, but because we were in the middle of a crisis, I'm not sure we ever really asked what happened to that money. One of the things that you all should ask, though, is it all spent down? And we need a receipt to understand how it was spent. Where did it go? The other piece, and I want to take one more second for the COVID conversation, one piece here is, one of the things that almost every governor did was they established a cabinet. They had an interagency, cross-issue department. As I shared with you, in the spring of 21, we were getting the COVID money, but by November, 6 months later, the infrastructure money was flowing. When we got to the infrastructure funding and we asked how were folks organizing, it was business as usual. The money went to the transportation department. It went to the water utility. It went to the Department of Environmental Protection Services. Everyone went back into their silos. This is an opportunity to ask, hey, you received $1.2 trillion and each state got at least $1 billion, and we can give you and show you how you get to your fact sheets? What did you do with that money, and is there some level of cross-integration that is in place? Because you did it during COVID, and the majority of the governors who were elected during COVID got reelected last November. So it's the same people. They understood that this was a moment for them to have an integrated, holistic approach. And yet, they get this trillions, and it's business as usual. I need you all to have a different type of conversation about this. Here's what I would say. In all fairness, there are 400 programs with the infrastructure funding, 125 new programs of that money. There are only a few that really do center community-based organizations. These are a few of them, because one of the things when we said that we were helping to create those enabling conditions, we really did go to the administration and say, are there incentives for your criteria and your discretionary money that can center community-based organizations? So while it might be deeply frustrating that you've had outside groups contacting you, it is designed that way. Y'all said that these folks would build projects in your backyard and no one would call you. And now the federal government is essentially saying, did you talk to someone in your community before you built this project? And then they're calling you and you're like, we are overwhelmed by the phone call. Y'all, we gotta pick, yeah. We got to we can't, I'm not saying you can't complain, but I just want you to know, because we were there fighting in Washington saying, hey, you have to have community voice. You got to make sure that you talk to the people. So they were like, okay, we'll put that in the requirements. They have to have community voice. They have to have community feedback. And then when the people are reaching out, you're like, I'm overwhelmed. Okay. So I'm just giving you the understanding. This is our conversation. So that when you go back home, you can explain the assignment. Because either you're going to play, or you're going to complain, or you're going to protest because it's coming. Period. Okay. Thank you. All right. So the one thing that I'll say about the Inflation Reduction Act, $400 billion, this is literally just the climate components as part of it. We need both of the pieces. It's everything from like pollution reduction pieces to clean energy deployment to EV infrastructure. We can send the fact sheets, but more importantly, you don't need me. As I said, when we're done with this, you will know how to find all of these tools. The other key pieces within the Inflation Reduction Act, there were 3 major programs that changed the game. The biggest grant program within the Inflation Reduction Act is actually called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. It is $27 billion. But this money is actually going to flow on the CDFI side, the Community Development Financial Institutions. And so many folks don't always really even engage with the CDFIs. This is an opportunity to have a different type of conversation because they're going to actually be key partners to unlocking this money. In that money, this is where you're going to find resources for everything from kind of the solar energy efficiency. There are a whole crew of people who've been doing building decarb conversations. This is where you get that money from. But you will have to partner with a community development financial institution to be able to unlock that resource as part of it. There's $3 billion just for environmental and climate justice blocks. I want to name this because I know that there was a conversation, and there's been a conversation with, well, I am not EJ. No, you are not. But when you hold the environmental framework, what you hold in this moment is the broadest sense of Mother Earth. And to the extent that you are addressing a justice lens to it, to ensure that is actually centering those who have been most harmed, there is a different way to have this conversation. And there still has to be respect for those who have been leading this work, but in the way that the federal government is describing environmental justice, it is a broadest sense of really thinking about communities that have been harmed by past investments and how to address those pieces as part of meeting this moment. There is also money going directly to states for what is considered the climate pollution reduction grants. This is another place on the planning side where you can get money working with your state DEPs, your Departments of Environmental Protections, to have a different conversation about their plans. Dan started to talk about that yesterday, and I'm not sure that we were fully getting it, but every state has a climate strategy plan. You should know about that plan. You should make sure that your neighborhood is in said plan. You should make sure that the money that is now being obligated for that plan bridges to what you need and really thinking about how to meet this moment. For the greenhouse gas, I won't spend too much time. Just know that there were 3 major programs. One of the ones that you should know about is Solar for All. Almost every state applied. Every state in New England did apply for Solar for All. And essentially what that means is that there will be, and this program is 100% low-income and disadvantaged communities. So this is a program where there will be up to $7 billion made available in the range of $250 million per state to be able to unlock this money to support rooftop solar pieces on homes. For renters and multifamily, there was a specific separate strategy to think about how to support that. If you are working in this space, you should be aware of it. please know that all the folks who have been knocking on your doors asking if you should put solar on your rooftop is about to flood. And so you're going to need to explain to folks what is happening and where this is coming from, and really thinking about how you meet this moment. The other two programs are essentially regional accelerators that have been set, and then what will be a large green bank that will offer for those monies to flow. The other key component of the programs that were available were the things that Matt started to talk about. The slides aren't the greatest for me right now, but the biggest piece that you should know is that there is going to be this climate change block grant, $10 to $20 million that goes directly to climate, environmental justice projects in this region. Anyone can apply. Y'all, how do we get you ready to unlock that money? And you can apply multiple times until you get it. EPA needed to ensure that all of the money was announced and spent down, because I don't know if you realize what's happening, but we don't even have a speaker in Congress. So they want to make sure that as much of the money that needs to be out is out, and that's what this conversation is. There was a big question for why we had to have this conversation right now. The federal government is about to shut down in 30 days. I'm not quite sure if we're going to reopen and what will happen after that. We will then go into the holidays and then a political cycle. I just want y'all to understand what's about to happen. So we've got 30 days to figure out how we self-organize, how we unlock the $40 million that's coming in through the Grant Makers program, and then get everyone engaged, because in less than a year, we have an election cycle, and we're not sure how the rest of this money may flow. This is that assignment. This is why we have a sense of urgency to find the partners who are going to be needed to really think about how we meet this moment. I want to just give, and I'm just holding the EPA because they had the most flexible money made available within the infrastructure and IRA resources available, and they also have the smallest shop. So a lot of their strategy has been push the money out, and whoever gets it will figure it out afterwards. This is why we are organizing. This is why we're in this room. This is why the team who have been our core partners decided, though we are moving at an accelerated pace that is mind-blowing in a lot of ways, that we had to bring folks together to have this conversation right now. So the way that the EPA money is going to flow is the technical assistance centers were meant to be the front door for the federal government, so that you may be able to actually enter into and understand, hey, I have a community plan. How do I enter into the process? Then from there, what you would enter into is a planning and project program development grant. That is the Grant Makers program. That is several other programs that are made available. They want to support and incentivize what we talked about, which was how do you bridge both community and government together. So they have the pilot and partnership grants so that it incentivizes both public sector and private sector to come together, so that then you could get to a place where you could actually implement a project at the scale of $10 to $20 billion. Now, it would have been great if this blueprint was given 4 years ago. We would have organized ourselves, we would have made sure that we had the resources, and we would have been ready. That is not the case. As I shared, all of this money has to be spent down by 2026 outside of the IRA money. So it is a lot, but we can meet this moment because we've been asking for it. So we have to collectively organize to think about those pieces. This climate pollution grant program, every state, as I shared, was incentivized to put together a plan. You need to understand that plan. But then what was made available is the option for them to compete for almost $5 billion to implement said plan. I'm talking these numbers, like I told you, I can't even tell you how many zeros follow what we're talking about in this moment. But what you need to know is who is the one in charge of these programs, and starting to ask the questions as to how do you plug in, or your community group plugs in to meet this moment. I explained direct pay, but the short piece is that the IRS will issue a check in advance. We've never seen that. We need to figure out how to actualize that. So let me bring it all together. As a result of all of these resources, President Biden then instructed at the very first day of his time in government, he said essentially, whether we are able to advance my blueprint for America or not, there are two things that we have to prioritize as an all-of-government approach. We have to tackle the climate crisis at home and abroad, and we have to ensure that we are advancing racial equity, that this administration would not be further impacting communities negatively. And that was everyone's charge to figure that out. This same conversation could happen at the state level. You could ask that your governors actually set some priorities around the money that they have spent. But to date, we have not, because we couldn't even track the money that was flowing. But I hope that by the end of this conversation, you know that there's a lot of money coming. Someone is in charge. You need to meet with said someone and ask for how they are prioritizing those dollars, period. In addition to that, the White House set up 2 teams, but to hold it all together, what he has prioritized is what he's calling Invest in America. It brings both the IRA and the infrastructure money together, the climate money and the infrastructure money together. So when you see that Invest in America brand logo, it is essentially saying all of the federal money that we have is considered Invest in America. And if you want to understand where the money has been spent, and I got to give them so much credit, there has not been anything to date, for the most part, that we've asked for that they have not created in a publicly available piece. What we didn't know was how to access it. Again, by the end of this conversation, you will. But they even went a step further, because we said, hey, one of the concerns in this moment is that we don't even understand the private sector investments. So when you go to invest.gov, you literally can pull up the private sector investments in your state, the public sector investments in your states, and the stories of how it may be able to impact other people so that you can help tell the story in your state. The umbrella to bring the whole of government approach around technical assistance then became the Thriving Communities Network. And so this is bringing the federal family, as we talked about, together. HUD, DOT, EPA, GSA, DOE, to have a conversation around how do we support the values of community. And remember, when we started this conversation, we said communities first felt like you need to have principles, because correction requires connection. If we don't have any rules to the road, then we don't know how we're playing. The federal government heard us. They said, okay, here are our principles for the money that we're going to be able to prioritize under this umbrella. The other thing that we asked for was that everyone, to the best of their ability, use the Thriving Communities umbrella for the money that was flowing, because we felt like it was too confusing to track all of the different federal monies and technical assistance support. So that's why you hear the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center, Thriving Communities Grant Makers Program, Challenge Grant, DOT Thriving Communities. It was just meant to be the branding that brought together all of the federal flows of technical assistance pieces. And what was grounding it was, how do we scale for impact? How do we build community wealth? How do we center the power of community? How do we meet the areas of greatest need? How do we expand access and participation? And for the most part, what happens with the federal government is, if you've always been a TA provider, you will continue to be the said TA provider. But they wanted to ensure that there were actually new groups to the table. So their commitment was to actually diversify that said pool. I need you to understand that, because even for a lot of these technical assistants, we've been saying community needs to be centered as the experts for it. They said, yeah, that's true. So join these teams and start to help to be centered in the process. And as people came to you all, you said, we can't do that. The Grant Makers Program, for example, we sat on this stage this morning. Dwayne was like, I'm game, but he said, I knew I couldn't lead. Bart was like, we definitely can't do it. But by the end of it, we got to a place of yes, because it is the federal government's intent to ensure that you don't have a traditional group being the lead. And it is our hope that it can grow so that there are other groups who could then be in this space. I just want to ground it so that you understand what we're doing here. And we probably should have done that on day one, but this was really meant for you to understand now how this all comes together. Sarita. Thank you. So to that point, there is a whole network. They've got money all throughout these places. New England has a lot of that as well. The other key piece here is they made it accessible. So invest.gov, like I shared with you, is the overall branding that if you want to find anything related to the federal money, you go to invest.gov. If you want to understand the infrastructure funding, you go to build.gov. And I'm gonna piece it apart again. When you get to build.gov, they have literally given you the playbook. And the reason why we ask that they lead it and not another entity is that there are a lot of playbooks and we never really know which one to follow. This is the playbook right here. You go to build.gov, you get all the technical assistance that's available both at the state level, that each state has said that they have available, and also what the federal agencies have available. You go to build.gov and you get a state-by-state fact sheet. So if you want to understand where's the water money, where's the transportation money, where's the clean energy money, they literally, and they update these fact sheets quarterly at a minimum. If you want to know where the money is and what's open, they have an open funding guide. And they tell you all the money that's available for each quarter. So when you're saying, I don't know, and we're too late, and we don't understand, they literally update it every quarter so that you know what pool of resources are made available. If you're on the workforce side, they have a workforce guide. If you are on the rural side, they've got a rural playbook. If you're on the tribal side, they have a tribal playbook. And if you're trying to figure out how to work with the private sector, they've got an accelerator playbook. Hello. Everything you need to know. If you are trying to figure out climate is your piece, that's what you want to center, they took the same playbook that came from the build team. They were like, no need for us to recreate it. We'll follow their playbook. So they literally have everything in terms of the Inflation Reduction Act. They have a playbook guide. They have a technical assistance guide. They have all the money that's being available through the IRA. They have a tax provision piece, particularly on that direct pay. If you don't know anything else, when we leave here, these are the 3 most important sites that I need you to go on to and to tell others about as we think about how to unlock this money. So again, bill.gov will give you all the information on the water, public transit, passenger rail, power grid, anything related to EJ money that's been put out, the clean electric buses pieces, everything related to how we think about broadband pieces, all available on bill.gov. That's the infrastructure arm. They even tell you what agencies have gotten the money as part of their dashboard. You can search for a specific program, you can search for a specific agency, you can search for a specific program, or even just your state. There's no reason why you can say that you don't understand what's going on. They have made it available to you. They've given you the state-by-state fact sheet so that you can understand what money your state has already received to date. Clean energy, same piece. And you can now figure out what private investment has been done. You may want to look at this if you are deciding, hey, I don't want to actually engage with the federal government, but I do want to hold folks accountable. And so the private piece will show you what that looks like. So now how do we mobilize for action? I wanted to use the rest of this time that we have left to answer any questions that you may have, but moreover to really highlight the area of opportunity. This presentation was more so focused on what the federal government is doing. But in this region, you have a governor, every governor, who needs to be asked the question around how are they spending this infrastructure money? How are they coordinating the infrastructure money? What advisory group has been made available to prioritize investments and what it looks like to meet this moment? While we have not talked about Justice 40, and in part because for us, we see this as a Liberation 100, and let me explain the why. Justice 40 is essentially the 40% of the discretionary money that the federal government has oversight over. But as we talked about yesterday, for every $1 that's given to the state, 90% or 90 cents is given directly to the state. So when we talk about Justice 40, we're talking about the 10% that the federal government has oversight over. So that's 4 cents. No, I'm not going to do a mobilizing strategy over the 4 cents. I'm here for the full 100. I want the full dollar to be in support of communities. But that means that you have to go ask your state agencies, governors, and elected officials how they are spending the 90 cents that's going into their state, and how are they prioritizing community voice and value as part of it. Because guess what? Just as President Biden was able to put an executive order to say we were going to prioritize 40% of the resources on the money that's flowing, every governor can do their own executive order. And they can prioritize. And guess what? It doesn't actually have to be limited to 40%. It can be 50, it could be 60, it could be to whatever community that they have decided. But guess what? You have to ask. So this is a make me do it moment. And I'm going to need you all to do your part to ensure that all of these federal dollars that are flowing to the state actually works in service to you. Thank you.